tuning into the Short Stacks. I'm Lisa Quintero, young adult librarian.
And I am Nick Barron, patron and sometimes volunteer.
This is a show where we talk to you about what we've been reading, listening to, or watching, and what's been going on at the library.
Library news.
So this week, there's not much to report. The only thing really to report is that Sherwood, as of last week, passed the mandate requiring masks to be worn in all public spaces. So when you are at the library, we do ask that you wear a mask unless you meet one of the exceptions that the ordinance has declared, and we have those posted all around the library. We ask that even if you're separate from other people, you still put the mask on and wear it accurately, so cover your nose and your mouth. Don't just have it hanging on your chin. But yeah, other than that, everything at the library is pretty much the same.
I thought you had some interesting programs going on involving making totes and growing things.
You're right. We've actually been doing kits for a variety of ages. So on Wednesdays, Miss Susan is doing the art cart kit still, like she has been doing. So you can either pick that up in person or via curbside pickup. On Thursdays, I've been doing a teen kit for kids in 7th through 12th grade. Mm-hmm. And this week's was a tote bag, and last week's was a friendship bracelet. And next week's will be a plushie toy that you can make. And so those you can also pick up through curbside or in person. And they are all, in limited supply, so the sooner you come in to pick them up, the better. Miss Heidi has also been doing some family fun night kits. I believe that's on it's been a few Tuesdays. And then I've also been doing some Tinker Lab kits. So those keep an eye out because they're not every week. They're like every 2 weeks. So the first one I did was a gardening kit. The next one that's coming up is going to be homemade batteries. And then the last one is going to be coding stuff to do at home. So yeah, keep an eye on the calendar for those and on our social media pages. Every time that every day that they happen, we tend to post on it. So like if for the teen stuff, I tend to post that stuff to the teen Instagram account. But the other stuff also gets posted to the Facebook account and the Twitter. So. And
what was the writing workshop?
Oh, that was also one of the teen kits. It was I changed NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, to SunOWriMo, being Summer Novel Writing Months. And I've been putting a bunch of writing prompts up on our Tumblr page for the teens. So if you're into creative writing, check out our Tumblr page, shorelibteens.tumblr.com, for some writing prompts. And, can get working on your novel or your poetry or your short stories or whatever it is that inspires you. And you don't even have to be a teen. If you're just into creative writing, check out the writing prompts.
Yeah, a reason to create.
Yeah, exactly.
From the stacks.
So what have you been reading, Nick?
So last time we recorded, I was reading Inside the Terrordome, and I am still reading Inside the Terrordome.
Yeah.
I'm still enjoying the book. I know I talked about it at great lengths before, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But the one thing that I am going to say that I wish I had, because when I reviewed it 2 weeks ago, I mentioned, I had read up to a certain point, and then I had read the last chapter just so that I could cover it and feel good about it. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I feel like I missed out on is that. The rest of the book, after the key records that I came up on, there was a lot of interesting stuff, but I also feel like the writer really takes a little too much time on what the critics said, and so a lot of the chapters are a lot of tearing them down, because it's just like a play-by-play of this is the decline of their career, and then this is the decline of their career, and this is the decline of their career. Like, he hits the hot points, but at the same time, It definitely doesn't feel like it's written by a fan, even though it's written by a fan.
Yeah, I could see, especially being a fan, that as you read that in that way, that it'd be harder to keep pushing yourself to read it, because you're just like, okay, well, I disagree with these people. And, sometimes it's good to know, criticism of things, but sometimes it's not necessarily what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And so I could see how that would be hard to push through to finish the book.
Yeah, and it's not to say that there aren't interesting bits, because there's lots of really interesting bits. And I'm going to share one last interesting bit, and that's that I didn't realize that in the early 2000s, Chuck D and the members of Public Enemy were very into the idea of collaboration, and that with the advent of how the internet was evolving, they really like the idea of doing these collaborative projects with their fans. And I know other bands like Weezer and what have you did stuff like that too. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that early on they put a number of their songs up a cappella, and then did a contest in order to have people do remixes of those songs with their vocal tracks. And I thought that was a really cool thing.
Oh, that is interesting.
So what are you reading?
So I actually just finished reading a book that a coworker recommended, and the book was called Eat That Frog, 21 Great Ways to Stop Procrastinating and Get More Done in Less Time by Brian Tracy. So it's a book about, time management and, like a lot of folks, since I've come back to work after all the, being on leave, or not really leave, after working from home because of coronavirus, it's hard to get back into the daily grind of the office and to remind yourself how to set priorities and break tasks up. At home, I was working in chunks of time and then having like chunks of time to myself and then working again in another chunk of time. Whereas, at work, you're there for 8 or 9 hours and you got to get stuff done in that allotted time. And so it's weird how you can go from being somebody who had a good way of being organized and doing things before all of this happened, and then somehow it all just kind of fades away in your brain and you're like, how did I used to do this? And so this book had a lot of great ideas on ways to make the most of your time and to really focus at work and to be your best self at work. And a lot of them are things that you probably would already know and that I already felt that I knew, but sometimes it's just good to hear ideas again in order to remind ourselves of like, oh yeah, if I plan out my day in advance and don't check my email right away, like I might get more done, because sometimes once you get stuck into email, you're worried about responding to emails and this and that, and so before you know it, you've spent an hour and a half doing emails and then you don't get the other things that you were supposed to get done.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of projects that got put aside because of us being shut down because of coronavirus, and now I feel like there's more projects on my plate, and I need to find ways to get organized again and to manage my time so that I can get everything that I want to get accomplished.
For sure.
So yeah, and it's I listened to it on Libby. It was an audiobook, but it's also available as a book at the library, and each chapter has exercises at the end that you can complete that were very helpful, like things like on goal setting and on how to track your progress on things, and on how to balance, your work and your life. And it was a really quick listen. It was only I think the audiobook was only 2 hours long, which is fairly short for an audiobook. The book itself is 20 chapters long, but they're all concise. So yeah, I highly recommend it if you two are going back to the daily grind at the office and are like, how did I do this before? And just need a reminder of, oh yeah, this is what structured 8-hour days look like as opposed to my work from home life.
Very good. And one of the things that also, not something that I've been reading, but something I've been listening to, I actually, inspired by listening to Public Enemy, now I'm doing a deep dive into Rage Against the Machine.
Okay, yeah. I know we were in the car earlier and you were listening to them, so.
So yeah, expect me to talk about that in the future.
All right, some of their albums.
Yes.
Cool.
So I wanted to do something different this week, and so I pitched it to Lisa. I wanted to do something, we'll call it The Library and Me. I wanted to talk about what really kind of, Lisa has been listening to podcasts about libraries and librarianship. And one of the questions that they ask at the beginning of each of this one particular podcast was, how did you find library science? But I kind of wanted to talk about, what drew you to libraries? What was the memories that you have of libraries that made that something that you connected with?
Yeah, before I start, the podcast that I was listening to is actually called LibVoices. So if you're into podcasts and especially podcasts about, librarians of color, which is what the podcast kind of revolves around, you should check it out. But yeah, I guess in terms of my upbringing, libraries were always there. I don't remember a time when, well, that's not right. I remember a time when I didn't go to the library, and that was because I didn't live in this country. But but that, other than that, as a kid, my mom always took us to the library. My family didn't ever have a lot of money, and so my parents, had some books at home, but the library is where we went to get books. My mom was a preschool teacher. She's retired now, and she taught preschool and kindergarten and first grade for a while. And so, she knew the value and the importance of reading to your children and of instilling a love of literature in them at an early age, and of, letting them pick their own books and follow their passions in terms of what they wanted to read. And so yeah, I remember, going and getting picture books when we were little. I don't really remember going to a lot of programs. I think she said that she took us to story time when we were little, but I don't remember that at all. I mostly remember story time from like preschool, not the library. But the thing that I remember the most is just the books, So I remember loving to read and loving to be read to as a kid. Like, I was one of those kids who my mom would read stories to us every night before bed. And as my sister got older, because my sister's older than I am, as she got older and she started reading, my sister would read to me before we would go to bed. And so my sister would read to me, and when my sister read to me, I thought it was super cool because my mom would read to me books that were like geared toward my age or whatever, and my sister would read to me, and my sister at the time was probably like in 3rd or 4th grade, and she was really into Sweet Valley High. And this is like a very dramatic series for those who don't know, about like 2 teenage sisters who are navigating high school, and I was just like, oh, drama. She was 8, I was like 5 or 6, and so like I loved when my sister read to me. I loved when my mom read to me, because my mom read a lot of like Roald Dahl and a lot of, she would let us pick out the books that sounded interesting, and then she would pick out books herself because, as a teacher, she knew stuff that other teachers had recommended to her, and so that was a big part of my childhood. And then I think, another thing that I really loved about libraries is once I became an adolescent, like libraries were a place where, a lot of adolescents I don't think feel welcome. Especially back then, because there were no like teen areas in libraries. And in my hometown library, there wasn't a young adult area. It was, there was the adult area. There was like, I think, a shelf that was supposed to be for high schoolers, but like it didn't really have much of anything. And like I said, my mom always encouraged us to follow our own interests and our own passions and to read whatever we wanted to read. She was never somebody who was like, you have to read at your level, or you have to you should, pick up the books that look interesting to you, and if you find that it's too much for you or you don't want to read it, you don't have to finish it, you can always put it back. And so that's how, as like a 6th, 7th grader, I ended up in the adult area, and because our library didn't have a lot of teen books, I got really into Stephen King for a while. I got really into Anne Rice and the vampire books. I got really into science fiction and fantasy, so I started reading a lot of like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and because I remember as a small child watching the PBS or BBC The Hobbit movie, the cartoon one from like the 70s or 80s. And I remember thinking, like, this looks awesome. And then when I realized it was a book, I was like, I want to read this book. And so I remember checking it out of the library multiple times because our library owned, like, the Lord of the Rings in, like, a 1-volume set. And so it was, like, this super thick book. And I couldn't finish it in one like, checkout period. And so I had to keep returning it and checking it back out. And so the library was, like, the place where I went to find things to kind of escape the grossness of being a teenager. As a teenager, I wasn't like somebody who was super outgoing or somebody who had a lot of stuff that I really liked about being a teenager. I wasn't, my teenage experience wasn't like some teenage movie. My teenage experience was more like go to school, go to work, go home, do homework, talk to my friends on the phone sometimes. This was mostly pre-internet. Late high school, we finally had internet in our house, and it was like Earthlink, and it took forever to dial up, and you couldn't be on the phone and have Earthlink going at the same time, so internet time was limited. And I watched a lot of TV, and I watched a lot of movies, and a lot of the movies that we watched came from the library too, because again, like I said, my family didn't have a lot of money, and so the library was where we got all of our entertainment. So all the music, like I got really into music when I was a kid, and all of it was stuff that I checked out of the library. And I had my CD player that had like the 2-tape deck below, and so I would record CDs from the library. I mean, I know this is not like kosher, but as a kid I did not know that like it wasn't okay to copyright things, or it wasn't okay to copy things, because of copyright laws. So I would like go to the library and record my favorite songs off of my CDs that I would check out, and then I would get into like the artists further, and I would check out more of their stuff. And then as I got older and got a job and had money, then I started like buying stuff by these artists that I had developed a liking for from checking their stuff out at the library. So yeah, the library has always just been a part of my life, other than, like I said, for a brief period when I was a child, we lived in Mexico, and there was no public library in our town. Like there was a library, but it was like a closed stacks place with government documents. There was no like reading in law books, no reading material for children or teens or no like light fluffy reading material. It was all just like serious documents and law stuff. So so from like 1st through 4th grade in Mexico, we had books that we had brought with us from the United States, and my parents had bought some books in Mexico as well, and then I had the books from like school, and that's what I read. And I remember, when we came back from Mexico, going to the library and just being like this treasure trove of stories, and I could check out whatever I wanted because there were no limits in terms of like what my parents allowed us to read. And so it opened up so many doors and so many ideas and so many different ways of viewing the world. And it just, public libraries shaped me as a person.
Mm-hmm. And for some reason I just pictured you wearing an extra large like boys tee that says "No Limits" gigantic on the front of it. For me, libraries were very important to me from about age 7 to about age 11 or 12. That those tween years. So I'm going to take you all on a journey. To a time before there were CDs, to a time before there were DVDs. Libraries didn't have that. They had vinyl records.
Yeah. When I was checking out movies, there were VHS tapes.
Yes. I never checked out. I should say I checked out vinyl records once or twice because I as a young lad I did listen to vinyl because my dad owned a record store.
Yeah.
So I did try checking out vinyl, but they always had scratches and the needle was jumping all over the
place. Yeah, that's the part of getting stuff from the library. I mean, I had plenty of CDs that were like so scratched up that I was like so sad because you'd go to listen to it and it wouldn't play. Or same now. DVDs, you check them out and sometimes they don't play because some people take care of things well and some people don't, and that's just part of it being a shared public thing.
We'll move on from the sad aspect. But anyway, so I grew up in Buffalo, New York, or the suburbs of Buffalo, New York, Amherst, and there was within our school district there was a group of libraries, and one of them was called the Greenhaven Library, and we'd go to the Greenhaven Library. And I remember my mom would check out Harlequin novels and things like that, romance, and I would wander around, and I wasn't much of a reader. When I first started going to the library. So my mom would take us and I would get out like Family Circus. I would get out Heathcliff.
Yep. I remember getting out Foxtrot and Garfield and all the comics. Yep. Yeah,
so if there was a Mad Magazine book of all Spy versus Spy cartoons, I was reading that. Something happened and I had a new interest in libraries because in 3rd grade, that Christmas time, my cousin got the Dungeons and Dragons basic set. And here I am, I'm 7 or 8 years old. I think 8 years old. I would have been 8 years old. 8 years old, and he says, "Hey, we're going to play a game." And he sits down, and we start playing something called the Keep on the Borderlands, a module for Dungeons and Dragons. And I was just... my little brain exploded. And at first, like I was like, I need to borrow this. And my cousins were like, "Oh, that's fine." But my aunt was like, "No, they have to have it, they just got this for Christmas. They need to have it for at least the next 2 weeks." And so as soon as 2 weeks was up, I was like, "All right, I'm ready to borrow it." And
children.
Yes. And so it was the type of thing, me calling and being like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready to borrow," and like they probably had forgotten, and I was just like so amped. And so I ended up borrowing the D&D basic set and reading the Keep on the Borderlands, and then forcing my mom to sit down, and while I handed her a bunch of characters that I had created, and I started explaining the dungeon and the game and what have you, and mercilessly killing all of my mom's characters. And it was, my mom still remembers it to this day, but my mom took something away from that. I think that she saw that it was important, and I had an enthusiasm that I didn't have before. At least about
Reading.
books. And
Yeah.
so she ended up calling the Greenhaven Library to see if they had any D&D books. And they had the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, and Deities and Demigods. And these were like the 4 core books to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. No longer even basic. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And here I'm 8 years old, and for the next like 6 months, I would take out these books, and if there were no holds, I would, retake them out, and if there were holds, then I would wait just anxiously for them to be available, and just keep rereading these same 4 manuals over and over again. There was even some awful book called Fantasy Wargaming or something like that, that is like regarded as like this other like D&D like game that was completely unplayable, but they had the book. And so I would flip through it and read bits and pieces and look at the pictures, and it was just my way of being one step closer to this thing that I was like enamored with. And yeah, it was just for a young me, it was super exciting because suddenly this place that I just was going to check out comics, I realized that it had so much more, and that it held all sorts of secrets and exciting things. This well of knowledge that I didn't realize it was before. To me, it was just a bunch of stuffy books with a stuffy place full of books where my mom would get out a book called Hold Me Captive.
Like Fabio on the cover.
So yeah.
Fabio.
But similar to when Lisa mentioned, then going into like reading like Tolkien and things like that, I ended up the next year in 4th grade, my teacher read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so then I was getting out all the Chronicles of Narnia books, and though after taking out these D&D books so many times, my mom ultimately ended up being like, all right, we're going to Walden Books. There's a name that most of you probably don't, many of you probably don't know or remember, but
some probably do.
Some probably do.
We're not that old, Nick.
Well,
you make it sound like we're 100.
But yeah, but I think it's very exciting. It's a very important thing to know that the library, it doesn't just have fiction or political nonfiction, that it has things like D&D manuals, so that there are these ways to help unlock your own creativity.
Yeah, your own creativity, your own interest, your own enthusiasm for learning. Yeah, do you have any memories about like a way a librarian specifically affected you? Did you ever have any encounters with librarians?
So that's I thought about this. I didn't expect this question to come, but I had thought about that, when I was piecing together this in my brain. And one of the things that I think is special about libraries now versus libraries then is I can't think of a single time that a librarian walked up to me at the Greenhaven Library or the Clearfield Library or even the Audubon Library, which was like the new like fancy library that opened when I was a teenager. I can't think of a single time that a librarian came up to me and like talked to me about what I was reading or anything like that. Yeah, it was the I hate to say it, the stuffy person behind the desk that had the stamper and would stamp the card and then stamp the other card and then hand you your book. Yeah. And so I didn't have any interactions with librarians. I never went to story time. It was libraries back then. They were different. There was the era of the shushing library.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I remember it too. Like I remember, public libraries at least. I don't remember having very great interactions with public libraries. And so like when I first became a librarian, I wasn't going to become a public librarian because I didn't have positive associations with public libraries. And part of that was because, again, like you said, I had the encounters with the stereotypical like what you see in the movies, the lady who shushes you and who, you ask her a question and she seems really annoyed. And I didn't feel comfortable going up to the librarians at my public library and asking them for help finding books, because every time that I did, I felt like, I was inconveniencing them somehow. And so the public library for me was a place of just me browsing and me exploring on my own. And rarely did I ask for help, because when I did, I didn't have very positive experiences. On the other hand, though, I had great experiences with my school librarians. And so I remember, like you mentioned, your teacher reading to you in class. And I remember our teacher also read to us in class. But then we would also have library time every week, and our librarian would also read to us when we were little. And then as we got older, it was more like we'd play things like Oregon Trail for anybody who remembers that, or, do things like that. And so I have very great memories of my school librarians. And, the school librarians were great because they would recommend like series that, like, if you were like, yeah, I just, our teacher just read The Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe, what should I read next? And they'd be like, here, check out this Lloyd Alexander book, and so then we'd see, I'd see if they had it at the school library, and if they didn't have it at the school library, then we'd go to the public library, and I had like my whole little list of books that I had to go look for at the public library if they didn't have them at the school library.
Lisa, you were supposed to directly follow it with Prince Caspian.
Well,
and then Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
I read the whole series, but once I was done with the series, I was like, what's next? What's next? And so then I read the Lloyd Alexander. I can't remember what the name of that series is, with like Owen and
it's funny, I've never read that author, but I can picture the skull-headed guy riding a horse and with flowing red cape. I can vividly picture.
I read that whole series, and then I got into a bunch of other stuff as well. But it was my school librarian who was the one who directed me in those ways, and was like encouraging of like, you should read this or you should read that. And so it's a little sad to me that my public librarians weren't like that when I was growing up, and I'm glad that the librarianship seems to be changing as a field, and that more of us are going up to people and asking them, what they want to read, and trying to, help people, especially like kids who are like, well, I don't know what I want to read next, because it's hard to, so especially when you're a kid, like, you don't know what's out there, and so, we're taught what questions to ask and how to get information out of a person in order to find what it is that you like about reading and what you're looking for. And so, I'm glad that that's more of a thing now, because, yeah, like I said, I have kids that come up to me at the library all the time and ask me what to read, and I never would have thought to do that as a kid at the public library, at least. At the school library, yes, of course I would do it. And then at the school library is also great in high school, because we didn't have a computer at home when I was in high school until like my senior year, and so the school library is where I did all my homework, because the school library had printing capabilities, they had the internet, they had, the computers, and by the time I was in high school, like, all of my teachers were requiring us to type our papers, and they wanted you to do it on a word processor, not on a typewriter. And so I would, go on my lunch period or after school, and I would type up all my papers in the school library. And also, when I had free periods, the hallways at my school were always super loud, and you could hang out in the hallway, like around the auditorium in my high school during a free period. But I liked to read a lot, and so I would go off to the library, and if I didn't have homework, I would go and read.
Since Lisa shared a story of her engaging in bad behavior by taping records from or CDs from the library. I was the kid that in high school I would skip my classes and then go to the library and read about the things that I actually wanted to know about. So school libraries, similar. In elementary school, we would stay after school in order to play Oregon Trail or Cranston Manor, because the library had the Apple IIe. Yes,
the Apple IIe with the giant floppy disks.
And the green screen, and the librarian had to load it up for us.
Yep.
But it was the place that we could do things like that, and it was exciting. But thinking about the shushing libraries, before we wrap this up, I just had this thought, and I have to wonder, this may sound ridiculous to an actual librarian, but there's part of me that wonders, like, the trend towards loud libraries and a more engaging experience. I wonder how many former boarders employees ended up going into library sciences and made this transition.
Yeah, no, I can tell you that a lot of people have. I'm a former Barnes and Noble employee, and I know that a lot of people at conferences that I've been to have, outed themselves as being former Borders employees or Walden Books or Barnes and Noble, and and all of us basically were like, hey, we love what we do, but we want to get paid more to do this, and also we don't want to have to like sell people things.
Yeah.
And so librarianship is perfect for that, because you're not selling anything. You're trying to get people to read more books, but there's no money interaction.
You're upselling knowledge, but without money.
But without money involved. Exactly. It's pretty cool. Yeah, that's why I went to library school, because I was working at Barnes & Noble, and I was like, I make $7 an hour here, and I like this, but I don't like the having to upsell everything and having to like make people buy memberships and having to do this and having to do that and meeting like sales quotas and all this stuff. I was like, I don't like that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, one of my professors encouraged me to go to library school to pursue archiving, and I had been a history major, so I was like, yeah, archiving sounds cool. And then once I got to library school, the library school that I went to, their like whole archiving department kind of quit because there was some sort of big drama that happened. And so
drama.
Yes. So the whole archiving department quit, and so there was only like one professor left that taught the preservation and conservation class. So I took that class, and I started taking some public library classes, and discovered that the public library was not what I remembered the librarians there being like. I took like youth services classes where we learned how to do story time, and we learned how to like do readers advisory, which is where we recommend books to people, and we learned how to engage with people more, and and the library itself started being talked about more as not just a repository of books, but a community center where everybody can come together, and librarians are there to provide resources, whether they be digital or physical, to help you accomplish your goals, whether those be the goal of entertainment or the goal of education.
Very good. So yeah, I think that was an interesting journey. So
yeah. So yeah, if you have any library memories that you'd like to share with us, whether they be things that happened in the past or things that have happened more recently, we always welcome your emails. We love hearing from our listeners. You can email them to us at shorewoodstacks@gmail.com. And Nick has a comment that one of our listeners sent us. I believe it was Andy.
Yep. So Andy wrote, and he said, it was around 1996-97 when I picked up Tricky's debut album, Max and K. Track 3, Black Steel, remains one of my all-time favorite songs, a forceful intensity which never fails to resonate. It was today I discovered that Black Steel is a reworking of Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos from Public Enemy's It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. So 24 years to connect two albums separated by only 7 years. There's a thing, eh? And there's a couple of additional notes. Certainly they were somewhere within 2 years of its release. I'd been a fan of his work since Massive Attack's Blue Lines, another standout album. Inspiration to cue up It Takes a Nation of Millions goes to the always informative The Shorewood Stacks podcast, episode number 12.
Awesome. Yeah, we love hearing from you. So if you've been enjoying what you've been hearing, you can engage with us on our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, and we are also on Twitter. And just post on the library page. Otherwise, like I said, you can email us at shorewoodstacks@gmail.com.
And maybe at some point I should do a deep dive on Tricky, because Tricky's great.
Yeah. All right. So as always, thank you for listening to the Shorewood Stacks. We hope you have enjoyed the show. You can find us on Spotify, Podbean, or iTunes. Until next time, thanks for listening, and be well. The Shorewood Stacks is produced by Lisa Quintero and Nick Barron for the Shorewood Public Library. Music on this episode is by Kevin MacLeod. The song is called Ice Flow and can be found at incompetech.com.